Hi guys, hope you are doing well today. This video is going to be dedicated to introducing our first book that we're going to be reading over the school year. It's called The Call of the Wild, and this is a great book to start off the year, kind of get us introduced to how to study character, how to study setting, and we're going to be talking about a lot of themes that this book presents for readers also. Okay? So this is sort of just kind of like a general layout of who the author was, where the story takes place, and some of the things that we're going to be encountering along the way. Before we get too settled into the story of The Call of the Wild, we got to first talk about who wrote the book and kind of what style he wrote the book in, and some of the subjects, the common characteristics of this sort of style of writing in the first place. So, a little bit about Jack London. He was born in San Francisco in 1876. Now, this is pretty significant because San Francisco today is a really, really large city with millions of people. But back in 1876, it clearly wasn't that big. So, what we typically view as California in terms of population wasn't always the case, and especially it wasn't the case whenever Jack London was born as well. Interesting about Jack London is that even though he's regarded as one of the greatest writers of all time, especially one of the greatest American writers of all time, he actually grew up extremely poor. So poor, in fact, that he was forced to drop out of school at only the age of 14. So imagine your guy's age, you're done with school, your father has abandoned your family, and in order to make ends meet, you have to do what you got to do, which at this time, a lot of people like Jack London and his family were simply forced out of school at a really young age to provide for their family. He started to work on ships a little bit. He actually became a pirate, not like a sword fighting pirate, of course. But he because he was a pirate and that kind of concerns stealing and a lot of shady activity, he did spend a time in jail. But not only a pirate, he was introduced to life on the water. Of course, he worked on a lot of ships. For a spell, he worked as a whaler, which, if you don't know what that is, that's somebody who hunts whales for a living. Believe it or not, those people exist, and he was one of them. In fact, whenever he was a whaler, it took him to a lot of places that otherwise he wouldn't have been to. He went to Europe, he went to Japan. And whenever he went to Japan, interestingly enough, that is what actually sparked his writing career. He witnessed a horrible typhoon, a horrible storm off the coast of Japan, and he wanted to write a story, wanted to write an article about it. And what's funny is that that article about his time on the water and experiencing that typhoon actually won him a prize in a local paper, won him 25 bucks, which back then was a lot of money. But more importantly, this time on the water, going to places, experiencing those fantastic episodes of bad weather, it introduced him to how unpredictable the world is and how kind of the natural environment surrounding him kind of reigns supreme. You can be careful on the water, you can take as many precautions as you want, but at the end of the day, on the water, you're kind of at mercy to the world around him. After he had his stint on the ships and working those types of odd jobs, he eventually did come back to school. He did finish high school and he did go to college, but later he dropped out of college so he could do what thousands of other people before him has done, which was to join the Klondike Gold Rush. Now, it's really important to, right out of the gate, differentiate the difference between the California Gold Rush and the Klondike Gold Rush because they're not the same. So, the California Gold Rush happened before Jack London was even born. It happened around the 1840s. The Klondike Gold Rush was a gold rush in which happened in Alaska. All right. So imagine how far, and I'm actually going to show you a map here in a little bit, how far the distance between California and Alaska is. It actually forces you to go through Canada, and it forces you into some pretty harsh terrain and pretty harsh weather in order just to get to the place where you could possibly mine for gold. So he left out of college and to join a train of people who were wanting to make it big, wanting to make it rich on the Klondike Gold Rush. Now, he did not make it rich on the gold rush. He did not become wealthy because he found so much gold, but he did experience again a lot of really unique scenarios that were afforded by his opportunity to travel. So this experience of him traveling up north and witnessing fantastic episodes of weather, just like he did off the coast of Japan with the typhoon, he witnessed a lot of things that led him to believe that, hey, human beings, we can make all of the choices and decisions we want to, but ultimately we're at mercy of the natural world around us. So, like I mentioned before, he was heavily influenced in his travels, and a lot of what he witnessed in his travels inspired what he actually wrote about. All right. And also, it shaped his personal philosophy, kind of like what he dictated his life by. And this thought process also influenced his writing, and we're definitely going to see it in our book, The Call of the Wild. This idea called social Darwinism. Okay. And basically, whenever you hear the word social Darwinism, think of the survival of the fittest, or only the strong survive. Because social Darwinism really believed that whoever is alive right now and whoever is going to be alive in the future is because they conquered nature. All right, that they were the predominant, the at the top of the food chain, that they were where they were in life because they were the fittest to be where they are. Okay. So that is a little bit about social Darwinism. They also believed that our survival, our path to remain on top, to be alive, that kind of brings out this brute within. All right. In order to survive, when our backs up are against the wall, if we're going to survive, we really need to dig deep within us to this kind of this creature, this survive at all costs, like you show your fangs and you're doing whatever you have to do to survive. And it's kind of interesting seeing how he believed in that, because a lot of people died on the Klondike Trail. A lot of animals died on the Klondike Trail. So it's easy to believe that, hey, if we are going to survive this crazy period into uncharted territories, we got to be strong. We really have to dig deep and pull from us this ability to adapt, this ability to survive. And that's not an easy thing to do, but we only get to survive if we do that. So, social Darwinism and this phenomenon called naturalism actually have a really close similarity. But whenever we hear the word naturalism, that actually refers to a specific literary movement, okay? And by literary movement, we mean time periods in which a lot of authors at the time wrote in a similar style. So this particular literary movement happened around the 18th. It says 18th and 19th centuries. That is actually a mistake. It's actually supposed to say late 19th and early 20th centuries. So that's my bad. And people who wrote in this style, people who were naturalist writers, they saw things that happened in the world as something that humans couldn't really control. They saw that whatever happens in our lives is because it was natural. Right? There were forces larger themselves at play that kind of arranged events to happen. All right. So they thought that if something happens, it's because nature intended for it to happen, and that humans can try to control as much as they want to in their lives, but ultimately, we are at mercy of the world around us. So, this type of belief that the world is supreme, that human beings can only really control so much, it produced a lot of really unique fiction. All right. So, fiction in the past, before naturalist writers, they tended to write from the perspective of a lot of rich people. Not all the time, but this was generally the majority of stories out there. They focused on people who were of a higher upper class, who their main decisions were what castle they were going to go to, which person they were going to marry, where they were going to travel, so on and so forth. But naturalist writers, they kind of broke away from that. They didn't want to sugarcoat life. Hey, there's a lot more out there than just focusing on who we were going to marry, focusing on our love life, focusing on our experiences traveling from point A to point B. All right. So they showed a lot of real life, so to speak. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They focused on all those ugly bumps and bruises along the way. A lot of naturalist writers welcomed death as something that happens in their story because, again, death is natural. All right. So they didn't shy away from the ugly or sort of like the unsavory parts of life. So a naturalist writer, whenever they sat down to write a book, they had certain characters in mind. And I want to make it really clear that not all characters of every single naturalist writer is the same. They could have focused on men and women. They could have focused on white characters, black characters. They could have focused on a story set in the United States. They could have set a story in Canada. So they're not all the same, but there are a lot of really common characteristics from one naturalist writer to the other. All right. The big one is one that we've already talked about, that they typically wrote a character who is at the mercy of nature. And I quickly want to go over what I mean by nature. So, whenever you hear the word nature, you typically think of green trees, green grass, a waterfall, a nice lake, a nice pond. You see animals majestically going on. That's not necessarily what I mean by nature. Okay. They meant that we were at the mercy of other people's actions or other phenomenon's actions. They thought that they were at the mercy of people, that they didn't really make a lot of decisions themselves. Rather, we are just responding to what we see around us. Okay. Kind of what human nature. All right. So you'll often see characters who are influenced by the decisions of another. You are often will see a character who is often influenced by the weather around them, their social class, their ability to adapt to the world around them. So that's what I mean by nature. Okay. We are kind of just responding to the way life kind of presents itself in front of us, which is kind of true once you pause to think about it a little bit. All right. So we talked a little bit about, again, everything is beyond their control. Yeah, we can choose what we want to eat, but not always, or that how we procure that is a little bit harder. Okay. How are we going to respond if a tree falls on our house? All right. So kind of like these decisions are a little bit bigger than us. Okay. So usually our characters also were people from common settings. It didn't really focus on rich people that much. Most of characters in a naturalist book are people like you and I, where we don't come from a lot of money. Our parents aren't anybody rich. Our parents aren't anybody very influential. So it kind of focused on normal, quote unquote, people. All right. So a lot of these characters are also really desperate. And because they are so low, or because they are so common, or because they are just so non-essential, they are forced to do certain actions, whether that's traveling, whether that is leaving your family in order to feed them, all right? Whether that is selling something that you really didn't want to sell, but you had to just in order to get by. All right. So their desperation often creates a lot of conflict. Okay. It can also create a lot of conflict again with nature, like the natural setting. Okay. So what we're going to see in the Call of the Wild specifically is you'll notice that there's a lot of descriptions of setting. And it's because the setting, this brutal northern climate on this really bad Klondike Trail, is forcing certain decisions by characters. All right. It's influencing them in ways that are beyond their control. All right. So that is a little bit about Jack London and the style in which he wrote. I wanted to show you this picture because in the book, it's going to seem like they're traveling a lot. And they really, really are. But I really wanted to put it into perspective for you guys. So you will hear that our main character travels thousands and thousands of miles. And if you're like me, whenever I read this, whenever I was young, you probably are thinking, how could they possibly travel this much? Like that's not even that's bigger than the United States probably, or bigger than a lot of states. Well, if you look up here, oh, let me go back. If you look up here to this outline of the state of Missouri in the upper right-hand corner, that is comparing the state of Missouri to the state of Alaska. Now, it's important to point out that Alaska wasn't a state yet at the time of this novel's writing. However, you get the idea. Okay, Alaska is huge, and so is the Yukon Territory, in which is kind of next to the state of Alaska. All right, so it is really, really big, and it's really, really big for a reason. Okay, they called this the last frontier because not a lot of people had gone to it before, and it was a really, really, really tough terrain to kind of travel in. I also wanted to show you guys this picture is because all of these little arrows so if you look at the word Alaska Range right here in front, all of those little arrows that are pointing upward, those are all mountain ranges. So I want you guys to imagine that you are responsible for traveling the state of Alaska and what you would likely encounter. You encounter countless mountain ranges. As you can see on the map, you encounter countless rivers. So this was not an easy journey by any means. So I also want to point out this map is that over here on the left is Alaska, but over here on the right is the Yukon Territory. All right. The Yukon Territory is actually in Canada. It's in northern Canada. It is a brutal place to go, especially during the winter time. Everything is frozen and it is always, always, always cold. Okay. So here is another map that I wanted to show you guys, and we're actually going to be ending here for today. Is this novel? It doesn't start out in the city of Seattle, which is right here at the very, very bottom of the map. Seattle, of course, is in the United States, all right? But they do eventually get there. And I want you guys to see they do not go by boat. They travel all by land. Just exactly how much distance is between Seattle and getting to Alaska, getting to the place where you're hopefully going to make it rich because there's a gold rush going on. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to give you guys is, or another reason why I wanted to give you guys this map, okay, is because a lot of the cities on these maps, both on this one and the one here, we are going to see in the Call of the Wild. Okay, so I wanted to give you guys, you're going to see a lot of different names of rivers, a lot of different names of mountain ranges, a lot of different towns and territories and settlements. So I wanted to actually put them on a map and give them to you guys. And I might actually even put these on Google Classroom just so you guys can see them there as well. Okay, so one last thing. Our main character of The Call of the Wild is a dog, believe it or not. We actually get to be in the brain of a dog. Okay. So the name of our character is Buck. He is a big Saint Bernard mixed with another breed of dog. And he is our main character, and he is the one who we are actually going to follow, who travels all the way from California to what you see on your screen right now, to Alaska. Okay. So it's a naturalist book written by one of the most famous authors of all time, and we actually follow a dog and his point of view. And we're also going to be talking about his changes. How does he change from California to how does he exist in Alaska? There's a really big change that occurs. And we're going to be talking about why it occurs. All right. And what type of lifestyle he has to embrace in order to survive. Okay. So that is it, guys. I hope this introduced you well to both the book, the author, and kind of the mindset of naturalist writers. We can't wait to start the book with you guys. And if you have any questions at all, as always, guys, please let me know. Thanks.